In a prior episode, I asked the question, as a PeopleSoft developer, should we learn JavaScript? And the answer, absolutely yes. Over the next several episodes, I want to show you what you can do if you know JavaScript. Now let's start with the console and let's review the global namespace from the console. So in a prior episode, we typed in window dot, and we saw a list of items in the what we call global namespace. Those would be variables or methods, or we might call them functions. Now, after logging into PeopleSoft, we see a whole lot more in the global namespace. Here, I want to type in timeout. And you can see I have the timeout URL. So when my session expires, that's the URL that PeopleSoft will hit. Let's see timeout, timeout, timeout. Let's scroll to the bottom of this list here. And we see the total timeout milliseconds and the warning timeout milliseconds. So the warning, that's how much time expires before PeopleSoft renders a message saying, hey, your session's about to expire. And then total timeout, that's when it's time for you to expire, and then it will hit that session expire URL. These values are maintained within the web profile. And I've combined them with custom JavaScript to keep a session active while the browser window is open. Now, I blogged about that several years ago, and I'll be sure to include the blog link in the video description. Okay, let's find a page and test some JavaScript statements. How about, let's go to Workforce Admin and then US Payroll Work Center. Now, JavaScript has full access to the HTML document object model, the DOM. That means I can add, I can remove, or I can change any content on this page. For example, there's a title at the top of the page, and I can change it with JavaScript. So let's inspect. Let's see what is the shape of that HTML. I can see there's an ID here. So, let's see, console. A little tip, I could go to the console and start typing in my JavaScript, or from the Elements tab, I can choose Show Console Drawer, and I can see both at the same time. So document.getElement by ID, and the ID of the item that I want. Let's test it. Line terminating semicolon, and we do get an object back. Okay, so let's try .inner text equals hello world. Line terminating semicolon. Perfect. Okay. Now, as a seasoned developer, you're probably saying to yourself, hey now, wait a minute. This element here, the ID looks like a combination of a work record and a field. Wouldn't it be better to use event mapping and people code to change that value? That way it updates the component buffer? Yes, exactly. That's correct. You see, with JavaScript, we can do anything. So we need to be judicious. All right, let's do a little more investigating. How about, let's inspect the NavBar icon. So inspect, and I see the image, of course. And then working our way up the HTML, I see, there's a hyperlink with an href, which invokes a JavaScript function. And the function requires a parameter, or does it require? I don't know, there's a parameter there. Let's try it. Can we invoke that function directly from the JavaScript console? Let's try. Do navbar. Oh, look at that. It's in the global namespace. Let's try it out. Oh, I can see the red here, so it threw an error. Okay, well, no, we can't. But here, let's reload the page. I've got another trick. Let's try this. So I'm going to right-click, inspect, find it again. But this time, rather than invoking the function, let's invoke the click handler. So document.getElement by ID, put in the ID of the item, make sure we get back an object as we expect, and then try the click handler. Oh, and I see I forgot the dots. Oh, perfect. There's our navbar, slid out. Okay. Oh, here's an idea. Using JavaScript, we can redefine the do navbar function. And that way we could perhaps have some code run before the do navbar function, or have some code run after. Now, I have an idea. Let's keep this simple. How about we just print a message before? So before the do navbar function is invoked, let's print a message. Let's just print it to the console. So here's what that might look like. So first we need a pointer to the existing do navbar function so we can invoke it from our own new do navbar function. So I'm going to declare a variable var do old, how about old do navbar equals do navbar. So we're saving off a pointer. And let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see the JavaScript. Bar old do navbar, okay. And now we need to redefine do navbar. Do navbar equals function. Now we know from looking up here at the HTML, the function expects a URL. So let's put the URL in there and declare a function. And let's see, what do we want in here? How about console.log? Let's see, received URL and the URL received. And then let's invoke the do navbar. The original, maybe original would be a better name for that instead of old. Original do navbar. Okay, so it's redefined. We see the response there saying, okay, it's redefined. Now let's try it out. Now we can click on the navbar here, the button, and it will of course invoke the new do navbar. Or we can just click because there's an overlay here. Clicking anywhere will cause it to invoke the same code. So do navbar, and we see received URL. Oh, in this case, nothing. Well, let's try again. And sure enough, there it is. Okay. Now, if we were to implement this and we wanted to take something like this into production, we would want to be careful not to pollute the global namespace. What does that mean? Not to create additional extraneous variables in the global namespace, as we did here. Old do navbar. And our trick for doing that is to create something that we call a closure. Basically, a self-executing function that stores a pointer, a variable, inside the self-executing function. See, JavaScript variables are function scoped. So as long as we keep a variable defined within a function scope, it won't be declared at the outer global namespace level. Here's what that might look like. Function. We'll declare a function. We got the outer parenthesis there because this is going to be a self-executing function. Think order of operations. And then we'll redefine. So var original do navbar equals do navbar. Okay, and then we want to redefine do navbar. Do navbar equals function. Boy, this looks very familiar, doesn't it? It is the same code, actually, just wrapped inside of a self-executing function. Console.log. How about, we want to log something different. So how about, let's just put asterisks in front of it. Received URL, and then original do navbar. Oh, this time I don't get help from the global namespace because the variable is not declared globally. So I need to make sure that I type that correctly, don't I? Okay, and so we're finishing off the function on the inside. Now we're going to finish off our self-executing function. Then we're going to execute it, hence the parentheses, and then close the order of operations. Now, the idea here is all the code inside this function block, function scope, is scoped to this function. So what does that mean? As soon as this is done, the variable original do navbar goes out of scope. But the do navbar function, which is at the global namespace, still points to the original do navbar. So even though the variable goes out of scope, meaning the variable is no longer declared, the pointer is still in memory, and do navbar can still access it. That's cool, isn't it? Let's try it out. Okay, so basically the code compiled, so we see that. All right, now if I click, Watch what happens when I click. It's actually, we're going to get a little bit more than we expect. So I click and, oh, look at that. We get asterisk, asterisk received and received. Why is that? Well, because our new do NavBar also has a pointer to the old do NavBar. So we actually have a function pointer to a function pointer. So basically, we've patched the function twice. Now, if what I just said doesn't make sense yet, that's okay. We can cover it in another topic, but those that know JavaScript will appreciate this best practice. Okay, how about something different? Let's take a look at the expand and collapse regions here on the side. So let's see, I have my work and I have links, I have queries, reports and processes, and let's inspect this. Let's look at links. So looking at the links, I can see there's a JavaScript function here. Okay, great. And I see the div, I see it has $2 next to it. Actually, down here on the hyperlink, I see a $2 as well. So there's a great ID here, $2. Let's look up a little bit. There's $1, $0. And probably down here, we probably have, say, a $3 for reports and processes, $3 and $4. Yeah, perfect. So what we're looking at here is rows in a grid. So those are the JavaScript IDs that PeopleSoft would generate. $0 for row 1, $4 for row 5. So let's go back to this one and let's go to the console. So document.get element by ID, the ID that I just copied to the clipboard. Let's make sure that we did in fact select an item. Okay, perfect. And let's try the click handler. Oh, good. So it expands on click and contracts on click. That's great. So now we know that we can use JavaScript to expand or collapse regions. Here's a good question. When? When would you want to expand or collapse a region? On what event? Perhaps page load. That's a great idea. Now, for a work center, we can actually configure these on load to either default to expanded or default to collapsed. So this is not something we would do with a work center. But the fluid accordion. Fluid accordions are not configurable, so it's not possible to expand or collapse based on a configuration. And this is a topic we cover in our Fluid 2 class. In fact, we have a soundbite dedicated to this topic, and we'll share it with you in the video description. Okay, so our JavaScript adventure has been fun, but I'll have to say, not very practical. So what is a practical use case for JavaScript? Actually, let's hear from you. Do you have a practical JavaScript use case? If so, use the video comments to share your ideas and your use cases with us. Now, before we go, let me show you something I built to demonstrate JavaScript capabilities, a practical example. So here, I have a Fluid page. It's called My Direct Reports, and it looks a lot like the Oracle delivered My Team. It's built using a Fluid grid, but using JavaScript, I'm able to transform the content into a different user experience. In this case, I'm using the Oracle Jet Masonry layout to provide some animation as the cards move around on the screen. Now, I've heard it said before that, oh, animations are just eye candy. Well, that is true. They are attractive and fun to watch when properly implemented. But this animation isn't for eye candy. It's for understanding. You see, as I resize the page, the tiles move around. To where do they move? You know, because you watch them move. And that's the value of a properly implemented animation. We don't have to waste time reorienting ourselves to the content. Okay, here's one more. Now, this is a view of the same data, but here I'm using the Oracle Jet film strip component to render content from the data grid. We're out of time for this episode, but let's use JavaScript to implement an Oracle Jet visualization in a future episode. Or here's an idea. Take a look at our Oracle Jet playlist, which includes several sound bites showing how to use Oracle Jet with PeopleTools. Now at JSM Pros, we teach PeopleTools concepts every week. Be sure to check out our website to see what we're offering next. Or here's an idea. Subscribe to our LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter feeds to receive updates every time we post a course. Or do you have a team that wants to learn more? Give us a call and let's get something scheduled. Now, before we go, I have a question for you. Do you have a topic you'd like us to cover on a future soundbite? Let us know by sharing your idea at soundbites.jsmpros.com. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more content. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.